Thank you very much, Dimitra, and thank you for all the CoHab team for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be here today, and big responsibility to be the first speaker. Actually, I think it's a good opportunity because my presentation focuses mainly on the definition of community-led housing as understood by UrbaMonde and the CoHabitat Network. So during the next half an hour, I'll be talking a little bit about what we understand for community-led housing, and then explaining a bit of the work that we do at UrbaMonde, and then I'll finish the presentation with a brief overview of the activities carried out by this international network called CoHabitat Network. So if you have any questions, as Dimitra said, I'm happy to answer them later, or otherwise you have my email in the first slide and feel free to contact me. So, okay, let's start. I would like to quickly introduce you to UrbaMonde, the organization I work in. We are French Swiss NGO based in Geneva since 2005 and in France since 2015. We are a small team of 7 people, I think. Yeah, 7 people, very multidisciplinary. We have project managers. They are architects, social scientists, engineers, and urban planners. And the center of our work is in the promotion of what we call the social production of habitat, or the translation to English, community-led housing. Since we believe that residents should be at the center of all decision-making when it comes to the production and management of cities. And here I use both terms as synonyms just to simplify. Social production of habitat is a term that usually there is a translation from the Producción Social del Hábitat in Spanish. And when I mention them both, it's just for simplicity's sake, they mean the same thing here. So before we enter in detail of what is community-led housing, I think it's important for us to have a very brief overview of the global context in which we are related to housing. As we all know, we are currently experiencing a big housing crisis all over the globe. We live in a context of very unequal cities, and those inequalities, as you can imagine, are much more visible and tangible in the global south, but in European cities more and more we can really visualize this as well when it comes to access to adequate housing. So for you to have an idea, it's estimated that 1.8 billion people globally lack access to adequate housing, and the predictions are not good. It's estimated that by 2030, this number will rise to 3 billion people. And those people, they face a series of challenges linked to their housing situation. They often have insecure tenure of land, which means that they're exposed to a higher risk of eviction. When they do have a secure tenure, they live in areas with high speculation, for example, and can be exposed to displacement by the private sector, often leading to identification of cities. And they also lack access to basic infrastructure. They are more exposed to the effects of climate change. And more than that, their housing situation often has an impact to their access to the city, so to access of other infrastructure, which puts them in a condition of exclusion and insecurity. So how can people respond to that? That's when it comes the social production of habitat or community-led housing. But before digging into the concept, I don't think we have time to interact, but I would just like you to take a moment to think on what housing means to you. How do you see housing? How do you perceive housing? And I ask this because there are many different ways that one can understand and perceive housing. And what is, for example, you can see housing as as an object or as an act of inhabitant. You can see housing as a formal or informal product, or as a finished product, or as a process. And what is interesting for us to note is that the way we perceive and understand housing will make it more or less participative, more or less sustainable, more or less inclusive, and it will ultimately either alleviate or aggravate the housing crisis. So among all of these different perceptions of housing, it comes down to seeing housing either as a commodity or as a human right. And when we see housing, when seen as a commodity, housing is regulated by supply and demand. And besides that, as a commodity, housing can only be accessed by those with enough purchase power and saving capacities, those who can benefit from financing. And the offers proposed by the market, they do not take into account the specificities of the buyer or the renter, the size of the family, the accessibility to public service, nothing. The main criteria is the client's economic situation, which means if he, she, or they are able or not to afford to pay for the house or to rent it. On the other hand, when we take a look at housing, when we see housing as a human right, we recognize that housing is a condition for a dignified life. And more than that, that the absence of adequate housing constitutes a structural social injustice that can affect all other areas of a person's life, including the access to other human rights, such as access to education, health, and so on. I think, yes. There is also differences, besides the way we understand the house, there's also differences on the way we produce housing, on the way housing is produced. And I will provide a very, very brief explanation on the differences. But we can think of housing as produced by the government. So what we call, I think my slides are not passing. So there is housing produced by the government, what we call, what we understand by social housing. And there is also housing produced by the private market. And there is this third way, or what we call the third way of producing housing, that is what we understand by community-led housing. So it's housing produced by civil society. And here are the main characteristics that differentiate community-led housing to state-led and private housing. In community-led housing, the final users control some or all stages of production, as opposed to what happens on state-led housing. Second, the final users operate in a non-profit basis, which means that housing is not intended for the market, speculation or rent-seeking activities, as opposed to what we see in the private market. And to summarize, community-led housing is produced solely with the purpose of responding to the housing needs of those involved, which means that housing is produced by and for its residents. So that's the definition, that's the very simple definition of it. And what I would like to highlight is that this third way of producing housing emerged as a response to deal with the fact that the state, neither the state nor the private market had the capacity to solve by themselves this huge lack of housing. So it's a solution to the housing crisis that we see today. So just to briefly summarize, to understand this, what I would also what I would like to highlight is that that does not mean that civil society should be responsible by itself to solve the housing crisis. It's also not that. And to understand that, let's just recap a little bit So community-led housing is a process by which people organize themselves collectively to build cities from the bottom up. Collectively, so together they plan, they finance, sometimes they even build, they manage and improve housing, public and common spaces and neighborhoods. And when we provide those citizen initiatives with appropriate financial support, technical assistance, and political support, then we achieve more sustainable and inclusive urban spaces that will meet the needs of those local communities and vulnerable populations and provide solutions to the contemporary urban challenges. And I would like to stress the importance of the financial and political support and the technical assistance, because without those, it's very difficult, sometimes even impossible, to provide for adequate, affordable, and sustainable housing. Just to finish, to keep in mind a few points before we move on. What is important to keep in mind is that when we talk about community-led housing, we often talk about more, it goes beyond housing. So you see through the seminars that the examples that you see, they often comprise a dimension that goes also to the neighborhood level and to the city level. So in a community housing projects, you can also often find infrastructure like public spaces managed by residents, or you provide spaces to develop social and solidarity economy activities, for example. So it's really, that's why I like the term social production of habitat, because when we talk about habitat, we're talking more than housing. And it's also important to differentiate collective management from self-building. I don't know all the examples that you see, but when we talk about housing cooperatives and community-led housing, it implies the full or partial management of the construction process, either when the collective hires or supervises the construction, hire or supervise the construction professionals, or by participating in the design of the housing plans, for example. But in some cases, this process also involves the participation of residents in the actual construction of buildings. But we see this mainly in Global South examples, and we call this mutual aid. And it's when residents that do not have enough saving capacities, they use their workforce to lower the costs of the housing project, and in this way they can access housing with a quality that they would not be able to do otherwise. And so when I just to precisely and concretely, when community-led housing can take a variety of forms. So when we speak about housing cooperatives, of course, this depends on the context, but usually when we speak about housing cooperatives, we are speaking about community-led housing. So it's a form of community-led housing, community-led trusts, saving groups, co-housings, and so on. And through the seminars, I think you explored these different types of housing cooperatives. But what I think it's important to highlight is the variety of structures that exists, and that can be formal and informal, and those processes they materialize through those. I hope it's all clear. I'm not sure if I'm going too fast, but okay. So with that in mind, I would like to quickly present the work that we do at UrbaMonde. What is our mission? How do we work? And how do we support and promote those practices? So in all our activities and work, we are committed at promoting and supporting sustainable cities that are produced by and for the residents. That's our mission. And as I've said in the beginning, we believe that residents and the end users of urban space must be at the center of the processes that produce the city and produce housing. We understand ourselves, we have different axis of work, and we see ourselves as a resource actor and as a support actor. As a resource actor, in the sense that we aim at connecting, highlighting synergies, and promoting collaboration between a variety of organizations at the international level, and we do so through the CoHabitat Network, but I will get more in detail in the final slides. And we see ourselves as a support actor in the sense that we coordinate several international cooperation projects all over the world, supporting grassroots, supporting local organizations that provide technical support to the local communities in their community-led housing projects. So I think it's important for us to see a concrete example, and I try to bring 2 examples from the Global South. I think it can be, I understand that it can be quite different from the European context, but I do think that there's a lot to be learned from them. And I think it will be very interesting for you to explore the differences and the similarities to some of the projects you are going to see in the next seminars. So one of the projects that we support is in Nicaragua, and it promotes the development of a specific model called the Mutual Aid Housing Cooperative model in a department of Nicaragua called Matagalpa. And our local partner is, we have a very long relationship with this local NGO called Multipro, which is actually a cooperative of professionals that provide all the necessary technical assistance to different communities in the establishment, in the management, and the construction of their housing cooperatives. So the housing cooperative model adopted by this project, as I said, we called it Mutual Aid, and it's a model that originated in Uruguay in 1960s and that has spread through Latin America to many different countries. And I'm not going to enter in detail, but this model has 4 main principles that includes collective property of the land and the buildings, which mean that they are owned by the cooperative, not by individual households. There is the dimension of mutual aid, which I mentioned in the beginning, which implies the direct participation of residents in the construction of their houses. So because those populations, they do not have saving capacities, they cannot many times access financing, their contribution to their project is with their workforce as well. So in this way, they can really lower the housing costs, and in the end, they access housing that has greater quality and that actually in the private market would be much more expensive. And there is the dimension of self-management, as I mentioned in all community housing projects, meaning that all processes are collectively managed by the cooperative under the principle of direct democracy, which means that every member of the cooperative, every household has the right to one vote in all the decisions. In this project, we have 6 cooperatives that are formed, which are all at different stages. It's a very complex context as well. Those cooperatives, some of them have managed already to acquire land, others are trying to secure financing, and others have already finished construction, as you can see in this lovely picture on the side. And it's a very interesting project as well, because they have managed to put in place a variety of tools, innovative tools for the development of those cooperatives. So for example, they have put in place a local revolving fund, which helps, which is fed in part by the savings of the cooperative members, and which helps acquiring land and constructing houses, and it's self-fully managed as well by all the cooperatives. So it's quite an innovative mechanism and very powerful, also in the negotiations with public authorities and other stakeholders. And again, this is all managed, collectively managed. And they also have put in place a school, a cooperative school that follows the principles of popular education and that intends to form residents on the values of cooperativism, because often those are it can be families that their main need is to access housing, and it's quite urgent. And it's important as well to build this sense of community, to build the mobilization, and to sort of build from with them the values in which they will be living together. So there is this cooperative school, and they have also formed a federation which is integrated by all the cooperatives in this municipality. And this federation has regular meetings in which they discuss their projects, in which they try to promote solidarity as well between them. And it also is a powerful tool in the negotiations with the public authorities, because they have a unified and common voice. Another example that I would like to share is now it's another model of community housing that it can be combined with housing cooperatives as well, but it's the model that we call community land trust. And it's a model that combines, as I explained in the previous slides, the case of this mutual aid housing cooperative. The property, the collective property is of land and the buildings. And in the case of the community land trust that we call CLTs, they combine the collective property of the land with the individual property of the buildings, which means that the land in which the buildings are collectively owned by this trust, which can be an association or even a housing cooperative. And the buildings are owned individually by the residents. And we support one project implemented by catalytic communities in Rio de Janeiro, which tries to implement the first Brazilian CLT in the context of a favela. So here we're talking about informal settlements. And as you might know, favelas suffer with a lack of tenure security, and which means that they are constantly exposed either to evictions, or when they are in valuable areas of the city, they also have the real estate speculation. So the idea, so the fact of regularizing those favelas, sometimes it can pose even greater risk if they are located in these very valuable parts of the city, close to the sea, for example. So the idea is that the CLT will take off the land of the private market, and the land will belong to the communities. And it's very good that the residents can still own their houses. And it's a very interesting legal format, particularly in Brazil and for other informal settlements across the world. I've put a link to a video that really explains everything much more didactically, and I'll be sending this. I think you'll be sending this to the students afterwards. So just to wrap it up, now I would like to present this other part of our work that is more at the international level. And this is, UrbaMonde is the coordinator of this international platform that we call CoHabitat Network. And all the organizations, the both organizations that I've mentioned before, Multipro and Catalytic Communities, they are part of this network. So it's a nonprofit informal network of civil society organizations and allies from across the world that works together in the promotion of people-led solutions to the unequal access to adequate housing. And what is valuable for us in this network, I know there are many networks out there, But what is valuable and different in the CoHabitat network is that we really gather together a variety of organizations. So you can see that you have grassroots organizations such as our local partners, so Multipro, CatCom, FUCFAM. They are all organizations. They're really based at the local level and that provide this technical assistance that I've mentioned to local projects. And we also have umbrella organizations and federations and coalitions such as the Asian Coalition for Housing Rights, Slum Dwellers International, Habitat International Coalition. And we also have academic actors such as IIT and TPU. So it's really a mix of organizations that all work in a different way to promote community-led housing. And what we try to create is really foster collaboration and highlight the synergies that we have in our work. And we do so by 4 different main line works. We do so by unlocking creativity and learning from each other, which means that we create spaces for exchange and mutual learning so that those organizations can really learn from each other, especially our local partners. It's very valuable to put them in contact and see how they are dealing with different, in their community-led housing projects, how they are dealing with the difficulties and what solutions they are implementing. It can be really inspiring to see this. And so we do reflect on the common practices, challenges, and potential for community-led housing all over the world. We also advocate collectively, and we do so by organizing joint events, campaigns, publication, public statements, really trying to create this common voice between all of us. And in the events that we organize, this is a picture of our collaborative stand that we organized at the World Urban Forum 11 in Katowice. And in all of those events, we try to bring the grassroots to the international spaces because, as you know, their voices are often unheard in those spaces as well as their participation. So it's really important as well to make those events the most inclusive as possible so that the voices of the community can also lead the discussions. And we also produce knowledge through research and documentation. So we carry a lot of systematization and capitalization of community-led projects. So if you want to know more about the projects and community-led housing in general, you're very welcome to check our publications. We actually just published one this week. It was a systematization around community mobilization and empowerment of local communities in those projects. It's the 3rd one that you can see. I can share the link afterwards. And finally, we try to experiment and promote innovative financial tools, either by documenting innovative practices such as the revolving fund mechanisms and the saving groups. And we try to closely collaborate as well with other organizations on the development of innovative financial mechanisms, but also in advocacy with financial institutions. So this is a lovely picture of our group in the last International Social Housing Festival in Barcelona last year. It was our annual meeting, and you can see it's a very inspiring group of people there. And I think some of them will come to present you.
Yes.
That's it. Thank you very much.